it kind of comes to one of those things where it's like it's easier to accept when somebody is upfront about their personality because there's no
Mm.
surprises. It's like, go ahead.
There are. I would disagree with that. And there are two very prone examples. The one I'll lead with one very specific one, and then I'll close with a broader based one that's not so much lived up to today, but used to be quite a bit. Um, Andy Kaufman, right off
Oh
the
yeah.
bat, everything every Andy Kaufman did was part of the act. When he was off stage, he was still quote unquote Andy Kaufman, the persona of on stage. So you really didn't know what you were getting. Do you know what I'm saying? Like
Sure.
there are probably very few people who could tell you who Andy Kaufman really was because the shtick never dropped for him. At least in terms of, the day to day, in terms of appearances and this and that. On a broader scale, back in the day, there used to be something called kayfabe in professional wrestling, in which it really wasn't well mainstream that wrestling was predetermined. It was more so, that kind of hush hush behind the curtain kind of thing or whatever.
Yeah.
But wrestlers in real life would live up to their persona when they were at meet and greets or in the public eye or doing interviews or this or that. If they were a bad guy at that point on TV, in the storylines, they would be a bad guy in that interview, or they would, rip up a kid's autograph book, or do all that kind of stuff. So sometimes the artist will continuously be that thing. Like it's almost like they're trying to stay on brand. Like the art starts
Yes.
to extend into interviews and stuff like that. You know what I mean? Does that make
That goes
sense? Like
back
it's
to the signature thing, right? Because
yes,
that becomes their signature. You're making a really good point. Wherein, you know, and this is a very interesting point to bring up in the art versus artist thing because sometimes the artist does become their art to a certain extent. That was something that happened.
absolutely.
That was something that happened with David Bowie, where as he would change personas, there was one point where one of the personas he changed into was sort of this weird crypto fascist like thing that was making a lot of people in the UK really uncomfortable because they were like, is he turning into this Nazi flirting like what's going on here? And then
Yeah.
later on David Bowie in an interview would revealed like, yeah, at the time I was doing a lot of cocaine and was kind of out of my mind. And which is often the case for a lot of those artists. So that's the other part of it, right? Is that when you see artists acting a fool, there is often a correlation to some other aspect in their life, like substance abuse
Sure.
or dealing with trauma or whatever. Because once again, kind of going back to David Bowie, something that he said recently, or not recently, he said in an interview I watched recently that I thought was really interesting was that artists are a weird bunch. We're kind of like, I shouldn't say this as a generalization, but often artists are dysfunctional in some way
Yeah.
because making art is not like a functional, rationalizable thing that you do to
I
like
was yeah.
survive in the world, right?
I was legitimately going to make that point. I was going to say, I don't know. I almost feel like being a perfect person would make you a terrible artist. Like a
Yes.
lot of great art comes from mistakes and flaws and self-examination and conflict with personal demon. Like most of the greatest stuff that we've seen, like I'm not talking about craftsmanship or skill, like drawing a straight line has nothing to do with whether or not you beat your wife. But in terms of the thematic premises and what you're saying and the philosophical messages that you might be portraying, I think innately all of these people, whoever they may be at the time, know what they're doing is wrong and are struggling with it. And sometimes they'll find some kind of therapy by getting it out in art. It's interesting because I think a lot about these days. A lot of people, when they think about Freud, they think about the whole philosophy that he did where it's like, oh, everyone's trying to fuck their parents.
Yeah.
Most men are looking for their mother in their wife or vice versa with daughters and fathers. But there's another theory that I believe it was him that brought forward, which was it's like, I forget what it's particularly called. Forgive me, maybe you know, Rainwater, but it's like the destruction syndrome or something like that, where it's like, in order to create, you must destroy. Like, it's just as powerful as a motivation to create. There is just as powerful motivation for someone to destroy. And I sometimes feel like artists are really in tune with that more so than other people. Yeah. And sometimes it comes out of them onto themselves, onto other people. Like, there's a lot of people who are self-destructive, like you talked about substances and this and that. Like, they self-destruct because it's like you said, they become the art, and it's like they need to, everybody's praising them, you know what I mean? Like, you get fans who are just rabid about, oh my God, you're my idol. And then you have record people who are like telling you everything you're making is gold. And I think like something clicks in an artist's brain where it's like, that I'm too perfect right now. I'm going to fall off of this unless I fuck up. So if I'm going to fuck up, I'm going to do it on my terms and fuck up the way I feel like I need to stab myself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.